Gale Galligan is the creator of 4 New York Times bestselling Babysitter's Club graphic novel adaptations by Anne M. Martin. They are also the creator of Freestyle. It's an awesome graphic novel if you haven't read it yet. I think we still have copies, yeah? Okay. It's original and it's critically acclaimed, and they did both the writing and the illustrating of that book. Next we have Jamar Nicholas. Jamar is an award-winning cartoonist and illustrator. He has dedicated his career to helping young people realize the power of cartooning and visual narrative. Last year, his debut graphic novel came out. It's Leon the Extraordinary. Highly recommend. Flip. Chad Sell. Artist, author, illustrator, and the creator of the Cardboard Kingdom and Doodleville graphic novel series. He's also created many other pieces of art on his website, including the short superhero graphic novel, The Cloud. You have copies of The Cloud?
Yeah, I'm giving out The Cloud with any book.
That's awesome. He's giving out The Cloud with any book, so you might want to pop over there after this. And finally, Maria Scrivan, the author and illustrator of New York Times bestselling Not Enough series. We have many of them in my own house, which is now in its 4th book. Maria is also an award-winning syndicated cartoonist. Her comic strip Half Full appears daily in publications around the country. Maria's work has appeared in Mad Magazine, Highlights, Parade Magazine, Wired, Huffington Post, and many, many others. So let's give all 4 of these amazing creators a big round of applause. I'm going to sit down there and ask questions, and then we're going to let you guys ask questions. So this panel, we are talking about doing it all. Writing the stories, illustrating the stories. How does that happen? I love this question. I can't wait to hear the answers. So let's start, we'll start with you, Jamar.
Okay.
I want to start by asking the question, when you see a story, do you see it first in words? Do you see it visually? How does your process work? I would love to hear this question from all of you, but how does your process work?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Casey. Whoa. All right, I'll speak over here. How's that? I don't want to encroach. So a little bit about my process is that I'm a very visual artist. I think in pictures. And usually when I'm creating the kind of what you would call storyboards for my story, or the thumbnails. Anybody heard that word thumbnail before? All right, a thumbnail is a very tiny little drawing. I kind of think of things in scenes first, and then I go back and then I start writing things. Real quick, a little bit that's new about my process is that for the longest time I never took the writing part not serious, but I didn't really give it its time as an important part of my process. Because people will come into my studio and they go, Jamar, why are you sitting in that chair looking out the window? I was like, I'm writing. And they're like, but you're not drawing. I'm like, no, I'm writing. So I want to make sure, I want to give a shout out to writing. Any writers up here? Writing? Let's go team writing. But anyway, to finish answering the question, I start off with an idea, and then I start drawing little pictures, and then I kind of go back and put words in the people's mouths. I literally do that for a living. I put words in people's mouths. I do know there's a lot of people that write first, and then they come up with the images, but I'm a little bit in the reverse. Casey, should I pass this on? Okay, there you go.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, it is. Where do you put this?
Yeah,
I'm very. It is a hot mic. I'm similar, and I'm also a doodler. I've always been doodling when I was a kid. I think every cartoonist got in trouble for doodling in the margins. I did, especially in math. But I come up with a story in this doodle process. So the story sort of tells me what's going to happen. The characters tell me what's going to happen. So I have a lot of fun just playing, and that's where the story comes from. And I actually, the first 2 books I wrote out and illustrated the entire book, draft after draft, and then finally moved to a script. But I can't do the script until I go through that doodle phase and really figure out what's happening in the story. So.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. Just like Jamar, I think in pictures, I think that's what's so special about comics, is that it's a visual thing. And I find that it's only by drawing my characters that they really come to life for me. I mean, that's what my book Doodleville is kind of all about, literally. But I think, you know, in drawing a character, sometimes whole new ideas for stories about them or what their character is like can come to you. Like in Cardboard Kingdom, there's a character called Connie the Robot, and she has this ridiculous big bulky cardboard box costume to dress up like the robot. And as soon as I started drawing her as the robot, I was like, that's so clunky, she's not going to be able to move around very much. And then that made me think, oh, that's really funny. Like, that can be a really funny thing about her character, that she like can't run around with the other kids. She's just kind of shuffling along like a robot, and that just made her seem like more of a ridiculous character. So I think by drawing your character, that's what really helps me kind of visualize them and imagine all kinds of stories and interactions that they can have.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like for me, I'm definitely in conversation with myself as I go. Like, I'll come up with an idea, get really excited to doodle it, like come up with different scenes in my mind, like of the really cool stuff I want to happen, but then you have to like get there. So rude. So like I myself will typically write an outline in a script while imagining like the visuals of what could happen. And as it turns out, like when I actually sit down to draw that script, just like you said, like all these other fun ideas start coming up, and I end up revising as I go. Like it's never one complete thing. It evolves as you go. And that's one of the things I absolutely love about it.
Back to Casey.
How do you know that an idea is a good story? How do you go from a doodling idea or a character or a scene and take that into a full manuscript or a full book?
I'm right next to Jamar, and he said earlier that a really good way of starting a book is to ask yourself a question, right? I was listening. And I actually, it got me interested because I do the exact same thing. I'm working through something in my life, I'm thinking about something a lot, and you just start gradually imagining how to explore that in a story. Like maybe your main character is going through that, you know? And I think that's a really great way of kind of, you work through your own things in your life and have maybe different characters come up with different solutions or answers to that problem or to that answer.
Yeah, actually, I want to add, it's funny you say that. So much of the stuff from Nat was me looking at my childhood stuff through a new lens. But a lot of the stuff I write doesn't make it into the story. And I think that's something that was hard for me to get used to in the beginning, especially because I have so many jokes in the story. And I was like, oh, but I really like this joke, but it doesn't fit. But that's part of the process. Sort of stuff stays in, stuff goes out, and sometimes I use it in a completely different story. Sometimes it needs more time to marinate. But not everything makes it in. So it's interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to not.
Yeah. So fun fact, graphic novels are a lot of drawings that all come together. They take work, they take thought, they take effort. So for me, another big question is, do I want to draw this? Is this idea like something that I really want to devote like, you know, a year or two of my life to, or 3 or 4 or 5? And often like the answer comes down to like, yeah, because like I love these characters, or I really want to explore the question of like, what does it mean to be a good friend? Like finding that one thing that gets you really, really, really excited to keep you going is a really big part of the idea process for me.
What they said.
How long does it take? How long does it take from when you have an idea to, well, I don't know, I guess you could also say a little bit about, do you create a dummy? And then how long from that point to the finished book? I don't know that everybody knows. We say years, but can you give us the timeline for the pieces, like the big pieces of your process?
Okay, I'll try to start. So this is something that is kind of not necessarily new for me, but like we said in my last answer, I've been trying to really calibrate how I'm spending time, right? Before, just as a cartoonist, you draw a lot, and people are looking for the art part. Where's the pages? Where's the art? Did you draw this thing? But I hadn't really thought about how much time I spent writing. Right, and the writing part was something I had to get through to get to the satisfying art part. So now that I've been doing these really long form graphic novels, I've realized that it takes me a couple of months to write something, and then it takes a lot more time to revise it and edit it and edit it and revise it, and oh, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't have put that there, maybe it goes there. And it's almost like getting to the art part is like the mile marker in it, right? So it's not like laying on your stomach and drawing with the crown, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I just want to get to the art part. So I would say a strong year for a project. Like Leon Extraordinary is 272 pages. It's a lot of pages. And it probably took me like a year and change to get the book completed. And then talking about when it actually comes out is a whole other conversation. But I would say a year, and some of you might be like, a year? That's so long. And yes, it is, but it goes by really fast. And if you're not paying attention, you'll lose a lot of momentum. So you have to make marks on every piece of the process. Does anybody want to save me from that question?
So for me, the first two books came out in 2020. So that was about 6 months each, which was a very compressed schedule. So the third and fourth and then fifth are now more like a year. But to be fair, I realized when I went back and looked at files, I had ideas for Not Enough back in 2013. So it was like I got the contract for it in 2018 and it came out in 2020. So like sort of like I was just started writing vignettes of my childhood, and then that ended up becoming the story. So sometimes it's a very long process. You don't really know where it's going to go.
Yeah, whenever I talk about how long it takes to make a book, I like to make it clear that I think what's so cool about comics is that they can take years and years. You might have, I've had story ideas, that 10, 15 years ago that still haven't made it into a book. But what I think is so important is that like some of the characters and story ideas I had as a kid, I'm now able to include in my book. And that some of the character ideas and stories that some of you young artists have right now literally might show up in a graphic novel series in 10, 15 years, and I think that's amazing. And so that's decades. But what I also love about comics is that you can make a mini comic in an afternoon. You can draw a 3 or 4 panel comic strip in an hour, right? It's something that's so fast, it's not meant to be super detailed or realistic or perfect. It's fun, right? So I love comparing the idea of spending an afternoon on something or spending 20 years of your life, thinking about something until it comes out into the world.
Yeah, it's true. That's a really good way to look at it, honestly. Like, there's no right or wrong way to make a comic. Like, you could take 10 years, or you could take an entire afternoon. The important thing is that you just, like, identify, like, what thrills you and go for it. For me, like, for example, I came up with the idea for freestyle in 2014, 2015, inspired by a character I drew in high school, and then ended up drawing the book in 2020. It took a year and a half to 2 years because I was lucky enough to be able to do that full time and put all of my concentration into making a book. But, like, everybody has a different process, and that is totally wonderful.
Sorry, did I answer?
You did.
I went first.
Yeah, I was gonna hand it to Casey, but she has.
I have my own yet. Jamar doesn't want the microphone. So, Maria, you have said that some of the stories from Nat are based on stories from your childhood. I would like to hear, how often are your characters you? You or kid you, and how does that work in terms of fiction?
Do you want me to start?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I think the most interesting thing for me, I started out writing childhood stories and then got to look at them through the lens of humor. A lot of the stuff that happened was not funny at the time, but after time, it got really funny. I was like, there's some good material in all the ridiculous things that happened. But for me, my character Nat really took on a life of her own, and I ended up learning from her, which is kind of cool. So it was sort of like the seeds of these ideas, but she just evolved, and it was really interesting to see that kind of change. And I think with all art, it ends up becoming autobiographical in some way or another, whether we like it or not, whether we realize it or not. There's absolutely ourselves, even if the character is nothing like anything that happened in our lives, like we definitely put ourselves into our work. So.
Yeah, this is a great question. And a lot of people ask me, Jamar, are you Leon? No, I am not. But I think all of our characters, anything that comes from our heads, we're kind of infusing something from our personalities into those characters. Sometimes that happens in really interesting ways. Has anybody read Leon yet? Anybody? You? Noah? That's my man right there. Give it up for Noah. He's my number one fan. There's a character in the book named Principal. He's the principal. We covered that. And he's kind of like a stand-in for a couple of really strong role models in my life. He's modeled after this guy, Jeff Canada, who I worked on a project with, and also my Uncle Nicky, who kind of has the same look. And it may not exactly be one person. Sometimes we meld more than one person into a character. It all kind of calls back to experience, and, it's great that we can kind of create a character that may help fill your world. I talk a lot about world building, and sometimes you need a character that needs to challenge your main character in this way, and I've got somebody in my head that could do that. Or maybe I have too many people that are doing the same thing, so I cut somebody out. But they all kind of come from me in a weird way.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, as a creative person, you end up really trying to put yourself into whatever you're working on, which can be really exciting and exploratory. Like when I was working on the Babysitters Club books, I remember starting the Stacy book and really feeling like, oh man, I am nothing like Stacy. She is so fashionable. She is so confident. She is so incredible. And I am over here like a little shy baby. But as I read the book and really tried to put myself into her shoes, I found myself identifying with her struggles and kind of understanding where she was coming from. So you do also end up getting to learn more about yourself in that way and putting yourself into whatever you're doing. And I think that is just super duper special. But yeah, I'm also definitely drawing on my own memories of childhood and being an absolutely ridiculous person. It all goes in. It goes into the soup.
I think like some of you had already said, different aspects of your personality can come out in different characters. So maybe we have an idealistic dreamer part of us, and maybe we have the kind of cynic that always sees the rational problem with anything. And you might make those two characters who are always arguing, just like you might always be arguing in your head about whether to be the dreamer optimistic or the pessimist, And just your everyday life can kind of seep into your stories. In Doodleville, it's set in Chicago, in the neighborhood I was living in Chicago at the time, and it was just so cool to go for a walk in the afternoon and to look around and to think, what would my character be doing? What would their walk home from school look like? And what cool parts of my neighborhood and community can I incorporate into it? It's just this natural interweaving of your everyday life into your work.
How many kids in the audience are artists? Who draws? Who doodles? Okay. Who writes? Stories? Anybody written a story? Okay. Did you all know that you wanted to write and illustrate in some capacity when you were a kid?
Sure. Kind of yes, kind of no. I remember drawing ever since I was super little. I absolutely loved the funny pages, Garfield, The Far Side. I would draw my own little comics inspired by those, and drawing comics was something that I ended up doing throughout my entire life, as a way to connect with people. If I showed it to someone and they laughed, it was the best feeling in the world. Validation, keep on going. So I did that, but at the same time, I didn't know that was a job people had. I couldn't make that mental connection, which is why it's so cool to see all of you here today. So I ended up going all right, I know animators are a thing, let's do that instead, and taking an entirely weird wild life pivot. So the answer is half yes, half no. It's something that I ended up doing anyway.
Yeah, I really loved comics just like you, and made a lot of my own little comics for a long time. But I experimented with lots of different things in college, and thought I was going to be a filmmaker or a fine artist or a photographer. But ultimately, I came back to comics because I just loved the kind of unique thing that they can do, and telling my stories in that way with pictures.
I have a very similar story to both of you, and I knew when I was a kid all I ever wanted to do was be a cartoonist, and I think what Gale said, I wasn't sure it could be a career, so I ended up trying all these crazy things, the windiest path ever, and then just came back to it, because I think it's all I really can do. I think I've tried everything else, and this is what this is what I can do. So anyway,
we're all broken. No, and I was one of those kids. I always wanted to be a cartoonist. And probably as I got older and I realized that people collaborated, and I was just oh wow, so how many people did it take to make this thing? What, the 7 of you? Really? I could just do it, right? And not for a sense of ego or anything, but I always just had my own very odd stories to tell. But I also wasn't that kid that was drawing hundreds of little stapled mini comics. I just kind of kept it all in my head. One interesting thing is when I was a lot younger, I really wanted to be a video game package art illustrator. I don't talk about that much, but I was really into I don't know, Pac-Man, and there's this I'm old, I don't know if you guys realize that. There's this old image of Pac-Man he's got a wafer head, and he's got track sneakers on, and I still draw track sneakers like this, and he's running and eating, and there's ghosts chasing him, and I used to take those images and change them to my friends, just because I wanted to make them laugh. My friend Carlos, who's in Leon, I would draw Super Carlos World, and there's things chasing him, and I just loved that idea of giving something to somebody, and they just you can control their emotions from that, and then the storytelling just kind of came from it. But this is my favorite part. I love writing and drawing. I do collaborate with people, but it's a very weird tug of war. I'd rather just do things by myself. Thank you very much.
Do you work on more than one project at a time, or do you find that you have to be hyper-focused on one thing at a time?
I'll start. In a weird way, you wind up always working on more than one thing. I would love to be able to say, yes, I'm just working on this, and I'm sure for everybody involved, they would like to see me work on one thing. But sometimes you just need to switch gears. I just wind up switching gears, and it may not be something that you're going to see in a store. Maybe it's just I need to just draw some pictures of something else, just to kind of keep me interested in a maybe a different creative way. The idea that you're drawing the same character over and over and over and over may not appeal to everybody. Some people will go oh, that would drive me up the wall. Just sometimes just to kind of give yourself a change of pace. I try to keep a couple of things spinning.
I'm the same way with that, and then up until the very recent past, I had the daily comic deadline, so I had to do other stuff always. My break was the comic in its weird way, so I'd be working on the book, and then to take a breather would do the comic. But I also get other ideas when I'm working on one book, so I can't help but sort of try and flesh out other ideas. And I think what Jamar said is the same. Sometimes I just want to draw something else, or just I love traveling and drawing things that I see. That's sort of a relaxing thing for me as well. So.
Yeah, I think it's great to sort of take a break and to try different styles, different kinds of stories. When I was doing Cardboard Kingdom, I would do that with 10 different writers, and then when I was doing Doodleville, I would draw and write that myself. And each year I would switch back and forth between the two projects, just because I really benefited from shifting back and forth. And inevitably, with publishing, you're working on really long publishing schedules, and so it does often make sense to maybe be once you have a story figured out, you spend a year drawing that, but that whole year you're thinking about, you're putting together in your head the next story. Maybe you're even outlining it, or you're sending things back and forth with a collaborator. I think it's just really good to shift things up and not put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't know about you, for me personally, like, during the very middle part of a book where you're penciling it, like, you're doing all of these rough drawings and nothing is quite finished yet, I personally start to feel like, have I done anything? Is this real? Is this a book? Do I like it? Do I like myself? What's happening? So, like, having a small side thing to jump to, just like, you remember how I told you, like, I loved to, like, show comics to people and have them go, like, oh, wow, that's so fun. Like, my way of communicating and connecting with people, like, having a small thing to do on the side where I can get that feedback and be like, oh, right, I'm still doing things. Like, it's very important to my process, just to remind me, like, oh, yeah, like, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Let's keep going. Like, here's what we're here for. And so I think it's really useful to say, like, hey, let's come up with a little idea for a mini comic. Let's do 6 pages about Garfield. We're having a good time.
You do great, like, mini comic side projects. They're so good, like the autobio ones, and yeah.
Oh my
so
gosh. Thank you so much.
yeah.
Do you create by hand or do you work digitally?
Sure. Howdy. Yeah. It's multi-part process. I used to, for the Babysitters Club, do everything in the early part of the process digitally. Like, I would rough everything out, thumbnail everything, and go all the way up to pencils, at which point I would print it all out on a big sheet of paper to ink physically, because that felt so much more fun and nice. Then I had a child. So now I go fully digitally just because I can move my workstation anywhere. Like, I have an iPad, I can lie on a couch, I can go travel, I can keep working. And it really is all about figuring out what works best for you and your process and your project. There is no one right answer. It's about what feels the best for the thing you're doing.
Yeah, I work almost entirely digitally, but I, like, hate it, and I'm constantly trying to figure out how to not do as much on my computer, and I'm still figuring that out. Yeah.
Exactly what you said, because I really feel it's funny. I love working digitally, but I feel when it's digital, it feels more like work, and when it's just pencil and paper, somehow it feels more like play. But the reality of process, and just like Gale said, like, I love that I can have my iPad, and if I'm on the road, I can continue working, whereas it's not as easy to have a whole workstation. So I kind of flip back and forth between between traditional and digital, and ultimately for me, no matter what, it ends up, the doodle pencil on paper has to be pencil on paper, sort of that, like, idea formation part for me.
I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret. You ready for a secret? Especially with a lot of my friends who are also cartoonists, but they're mainly comic book, like, superhero people. Like, they draw Daredevil and things like that. When I told them that I did the last book digitally, they went, what? Where's your stack of paper? And there's something really, I don't know, satisfying about the stack. You all know about the stack. How many pages was this? Look at the stack! Ah, it's a stack! And I miss the stack. I do miss the stack. Kind of like in cartoonist world, that means, like, that's a mountain you climbed, and you have a physical manifestation of it. And when you do it digitally, they're just like, it's like a folder. And it doesn't feel like the volume doesn't feel the same. But, again, to kind of go along with everybody's answer, just for your process and just the way your studio works and just for time, working digitally just saves so much time and, gets the thing done faster than you could do on paper. But hold on, last thing. I want to say that, especially for a lot of people who are like, oh, I got my kid an iPad, now you just press the art button and art comes out of it. Like, all the things that we learned as being cartoonists and drawing on paper still applies to digital. So I would implore everybody to still draw with pencil and paper.
I want to go back to something, Gale, that you said a few minutes ago, thinking about the process. So how often do you feel like whatever you're trying to do is maybe not good enough? I know that when I'm writing, I have messy drafts, and there's a chunk of time every time where I think, oh, is this something? Is that just part of your process? How does that fit? And do you feel it a lot, a little? Is it gotten different over time? Talk about that.
I love this. Yes, surprise. I don't know about you guys, but I'm a very delicate creature. A big part of my story making process is interrogating the thing I'm making. Like, why am I trying to do this? Is this working? How can I make it better? And a lot of the time that does end up turning into feelings like, this isn't where I want it to be yet. This isn't good enough yet. I know where I want it to be. I'm not there yet. And I feel like as I've made more books, I have learned when that feeling comes, what it feels like, and recognize that I came out at the end with a book I liked anyway. So knowing that I've done that before and can do it again is really helpful. But also having a support network, having friends that I can reach out to and say hey, is this anything? Can you talk me through this? How do you feel? Give me some questions, help me out. It is so useful to have a group of people whose opinions you trust. Even if I don't always take everybody's advice, just hearing the questions they ask will help me figure out what I was actually trying to do. So it definitely is nothing ever starts out perfect, but this is worth figuring out how to get it where I want it to be. It's a process.
Yeah, I think there are so many times when you're drawing or trying to work a story idea out where it just is not coming out like how you pictured it in your head. That's so hard as a professional cartoonist or as a young artist, realizing that what you make on the paper doesn't always perfectly match what you had imagined it to be. And that can be really frustrating, and you can really beat yourself up about it. That's literally what Doodleville is about, literally letting all of your insecurities turn into a giant monster that is going to destroy everything. And that's exactly how I was feeling when I was making the book, Gale, you had mentioned how making a book is often about a kind of a conversation with yourself. And I think so much of that is, getting something as good as you can, setting it aside, doing something different, and then revisiting it, having that conversation with your past self and saying, oh, I did some stuff really well here. That was totally bad, but it's fine. I'll change it. It kind of coming back and being gracious with yourself and your own shortcomings, perhaps, but also celebrating what you're good at and what you enjoy doing and trying to keep that going,
I love what you just said about being gracious with yourself. That's really important. That's really wonderful. And funny enough, Nat for Nothing has these little creatures on the front, which are doubt gremlins. And those are the voices in my head that are like, you don't know what you're doing. You can't do this. And funny enough, I was just watching the Oscars this year, and one of the directors for Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, had an Oscar in his hand and looked at the camera and said, I have imposter syndrome. I don't know how much more validation you need than an Oscar in your hand, but I think that as artists, we all have this as a built-in feature. It helps us be better. The trick is to not let us stop us. So when I have these kind of things like, what are you doing? I'm like, okay, I see you here, so I tell them to go read a book or watch a movie, get out of the way, because I have stuff to do. And like Gale said, I think the more work you do, you're like, okay, yeah, I've done this before. I can do this again. And they sort of come up and push you to do better, but you just learn not to listen, not to let them stop you. So
I've got nothing. That was fantastic. Let's move on.
That was fantastic.
That was great.
I have a question about the editing process. How does it work when you're doing all the writing and the illustrating? Is there a point where, how do you know what to edit, I guess? Is it a combination of words?
It's what your editor tells you to change, right? Yeah, because you take something as far along as you can, and you send it off to them, and you say, I hope I still have a book deal after this, And usually editors are very gracious. They're used to working with very sensitive artists like us, and so they're really good at telling you everything they loved about your manuscript, and then throwing in everything they didn't, and then reminding you that they still love you and they love the book, and everything's fine. Yeah.
That's completely perfect.
Right.
No.
No, that's it. Oh, hold on, here, let me see. My favorite email is, "We have notes."
No.
All right, I'm stuck with it. Okay. No, there's nothing else to add there. That's perfect. You do the best you can. You turn things in. You kind of like hit send, and you're like, "Whew, wait a minute, I can't relax. They're gonna respond soon." And then you get notes. And what notes means is like, well, we love what you turned in. There's some things that we have suggestions about. Maybe, are you sure that that character has 6 fingers in this panel? Oh man, I drew too many fingers. There's sometimes that happens a lot. That happens a lot to me, because you kind of get into a flow, and then once you look at the stack, you're like, oh wow, how did that happen? And sometimes being edited, it's really a good thing. And if I could talk to this real quick,
Yeah.
With some buddies who aren't doing graphic novels or things, and they'll ask me where I am in my process. So I'm like, oh well, I turned in the book, but I'm waiting for notes. And then they go, wait, but you made it. How can they tell you what's wrong? And I said, that's kind of like a weird way to think about it. It's not that it's wrong. They're edits, they're suggestions. You don't have to change it because it's wrong, but maybe there's a different way to do it. So if you understand how the collaboration works and you're open to that, it makes your work better. Let's give it up for the 415. So I hope that was a good answer.
Yeah, that was a great answer. What do you think the most powerful thing is, or the part is, about graphic novels? What makes them so spectacular and unique?
I think it's the connection with the reader and the fact that beyond the words are all of these extra layers. It can be the most subtle expression on a character's face. It can be the little Easter eggs that are in the background. For me, as in the humor part of it, I love adding extra layers, and it's the kind of thing that you can read over and over again and get something new every single time.
I love that cartooning is like a look directly into the artist's imagination and how they see the world. Like if you think about like cartoons, like Garfield the cat doesn't look anything like a cat. Mickey the mouse doesn't look anything like a mouse. It's like how those animators, how those artists kind of bring out their idea of a mouse, or like even the most mundane kind of scene, just like working in an office, through a cartoonist's weird, unique way of seeing and drawing the world, it can become something much different and weirder. And I think that that's just such a fascinating, like intimate, like experience. And every cartoonist is so unique and brings such a different vibe to the project.
Oh man, where to begin? I love comics. They're so cool. Comics are just like this really pure form of communication where the artist is really, really, really trying to make this fun, engaging experience for the reader in a really sneaky way. Like, you might not realize it, but a cartoonist is breaking this page down into boxes and then putting everything in each box to keep your eye moving in the correct order. The word balloons all have to be read in the right order. Somebody might be like pointing their finger at something and the line of their arm will take your eye to the next panel. Like, everything is planned out. Everything is so thoughtful. The colors can tell you how people feel. And then like all the different disciplines that end up going into it. You've got costume design, architecture, like writing, like we have our own grammar. There is so much going on underneath the surface and so much to sink your teeth into that you really could just like read one comic every day for the rest of your life and get something new out of it. That's amazing.
So you're basically superheroes, is what we're saying. Yeah.
One of my favorite things about doing this is meeting the readers, and it kind of makes everything worth it. Like I met my man Noah. Shout out to my man Noah. We see you in the front row, VIP seating. Who came up to me? Can we talk? Can we talk candidly? Noah came up to see me today with a well worn, well-read copy of Leon Extraordinary. And oh, my heart, that's what it's all about. And we shared a moment. And, you know, just connecting with readers and having them just get something from it. Maybe they see themselves in the pages. Maybe they find a new way of showing empathy for somebody they may not have given a second chance to in the past. Like, all of that is worth it and makes cartooning such a great thing to do. Cartooning thing, yeah.
Let's meet some more readers. Who's got questions?
Ooh.
Noah.
Noah's the MVP.
If you have like two books at once, do you get inspiration from one of your books to put in the other one? Like, not just inspiration from like a different comic or a different TV show from somebody else, but like if you have two books going on at once, do you take inspiration from this one to put it into this one so that like they're like together but not and like at like the same time?
Take this microphone from me. They're gonna make me hold it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you definitely try to find commonality, but I think almost the bigger challenge when you're working on two books is not just telling the same story with both of them, you know, because you're working through whatever is in your life at that point, and it's really easy to like make all of your stories about the same thing if you don't let it take over. Anyway.
I'm just going to hold this.
Did that answer your question? All right, cool.
Did you have questions?
What's your favorite book that you've written, and what's your favorite character in the book that you wrote?
Oh, that's such a great question. Is the 430s coming? Is that? I'll try to do it real quick. My favorite book. Is Leon the Extraordinary. And my favorite character in Leon's stories is Clementine. And when you get to read Leon, you'll learn all about Clementine, who is very, very misunderstood. And what I like about her is that she is somebody who you may not give a lot of time and credit to, but you know, if you give her a moment to kind of figure out who she is, you'll really fall in love with her. I think that's really special.
It's hard for me to say because I've learned so much about book writing and myself in each book, but if I had to choose, I would say Not Enough because it was my first book. I had to figure out the world, the characters, and everything. And although Nat was based on my childhood self, like I said, she took on a life of her own. My favorite character really is Flo, the girl with her hair and her eyes, because she is such a surprise to me when she shows up on the page. I never know what she's going to say or do, and it's really fun for me to watch her.
I guess probably making my first book, Cardboard Kingdom, felt like the most magical, serendipitous thing because I was doing it with 10 different writers. But probably my favorite character in the book is Jack the Sorceress, because Jack is kind of based on my childhood, but Jack is a much more fabulous little diva who wears much better costumes than I did when I was that age.
A mood. Yeah, I guess for me, I'll usually say my favorite book is the one I've done the most recently because I still feel like I'm learning and growing and can be really proud of like all the new work I've done. So for me, that's Freestyle. And my favorite character from Freestyle is probably Asha. I worked really hard to try to come up with like interior lives for every member of this big dance crew. Listen, I finished the Babysitters Club. There were like 8 members of that club. I said, never again, no more group scenes. We're gonna do one person, and then like did a whole dance crew. So like, sorry me. But yeah, I had a lot of fun trying to find ways to like show Asha's personality through the scenes they got. Where being like, okay, this is like a cosplayer who like loves their friends, and like in every scene they're like trying to bring their friend group back together, and trying to show that was really fun.
What is your favorite book that you ever wrote, and do any of your characters relate to you?
Want to start?
Sure. I'm kind of altering my last answer because, yeah, the last thing I did is probably my favorite because it's still really fresh. But you know what? I really enjoyed Leon, and I am not Leon. People actually come up to me and go, "Hey, Leon, can I buy this book?" I'm not Leon. This is the adventures of me when I was in grade school. What I like about Leon is that he shares a lot of commonality with how I grew up. I'm an only child. Shout out to Only Children. Only Children Club. Woo, woo, woo. And it was just, I grew up with just me and my mother, and it was kind of like us against the world. So you'll see a little bit of that in the book, where Leon has a really special relationship with his mother. And even though we didn't go through the same exact things, I'm bringing that energy into the character, and I think people really relate to that.
It's like I said, based not on my child itself, but it's really been fun to watch her kind of like do different things. And I also kind of find that I find myself in all the characters in a little bit, even the bullies, and that could be myself bullying myself. So when I really look back, I kind of find little seeds of personality in all the characters.
Yeah, like I said, Jack the Sorceress is based on most like me, but like Maria said, you find aspects of yourself in every character. So like Connie the robot is this super awkward robotic person who avoids weird social situations by just reverting to being a awkward robot, and that's exactly me. There was a long stretch of time when I would revert to a robot voice whenever I felt distinctly uncomfortable.
I feel that. Yeah. I definitely feel like I put my own feelings into characters in ways that I can relate to. Like for Corey, the main character, Freestyle. I remember having a lot of trouble when I was growing up. If I had multiple friends from different friend groups and then had to host a birthday party, I was eternally anxious. Can I make these people connect? Are we separate? I don't know. So having someone dealing with different friend feelings was definitely something I could connect to. And stuff like that you definitely work into your stories.
Thank you. So in my illustration class, my teacher told me that illustrators most of the time get inspiration from other books, and I'm not sure if it's true, but I want to ask if that is true, and if yes, who was your inspiration, and from building up the characters and everything.
There's a train coming. I'll say that, and this is always a cool question to answer when people ask, what are your cartooning inspirations? And then when you tell them, they go, well, you don't draw like that. And that's not exactly how that connects with us. Sometimes you're inspired just by the longevity of a cartoonist, or maybe the way they write, their word balloons and things like that. Some of my favorite things are, I'm a big newspaper comic strip fan. Remember newspapers? Remember those things? So when I was little, I really liked Doonesbury. From shout out to Doonesbury, Gary Trudeau. I was 6 years old reading Doonesbury. I knew nothing about the Iran-Contra scandal and things like that. But I thought he had a really interesting style, and the way he controlled his universe was crazy and interesting. Also a big Bloom County fan. Shout out to Opus. Calvin and Hobbes came later. That's how old I am. Calvin and Hobbes came later. But just watching somebody control a world, and I talk about world building a lot, really inspired me, and that's kind of where I get a lot of my cartooning inspiration from.
I was also a huge comic strip fan. I would read the Sunday Funnies start to finish. I also loved Bugs Bunny. I loved Shel Silverstein. And in the comics, I was a huge Garfield fan, a huge Peanuts fan. Calvin and Hobbes came later for me also. But I really loved all of that. And I definitely have that sensibility in I draw very simply, so I draw more like a comic strip artist. So I think to your point, our inspiration could be anything from a color palette that an artist uses. So you kind of pick up all these different things and piece it together for your own style.
Yeah, I think it's totally fine to get a lot of inspiration from other people, and sometimes it might be doing fan art of a favorite character. Sometimes, when I was a kid, I loved superhero comics, and so I would do drawings of my own characters, but in the exact same pose as as Silver Surfer or Spider-Man, because that was me copying the muscles and the pose and proportions and stuff like that. And that's just how you learn, and inevitably you put your own spin on things. You see and draw things your own way, and so even if you're trying to copy someone else, the end product might be totally different, and that's awesome, and you can kind of run with that.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. Like, especially if you're like working on finding your style, on figuring out what exactly works for you. Like, I find it really helpful to look at the stuff you like or don't like and ask yourself about it. Like, why do I love, for example, Yu-Gi-Oh so much? Like, what about this visual style really appeals to me? And for me, it's like a specific way that this artist drew like eyes or the lines of a hand. Like, how could I emulate that? How could I steal it for myself? Why do I hate this other thing? What would I do differently? Asking yourself questions about the stuff that is affecting you is a great way to build up your own personal work.
I think we have time for one more question.
Oh, they're gonna have to fight now. Oh.
How do you kind of like keep the character the same? Because sometimes when I do like comics, either like the head's too big or like the hair looks weird. Like, how do you kind of keep it like that?
You don't. You try, and you don't. Like, I bet with any of us, I know for me, the way that you start drawing a character, by the end of the book, they'll look really different. And then if you're doing multiple books in a series, oh man, the one like saving grace is that no one typically is as big of a critic of your art as you are. And so you might see that, oh, this character, like their eyes are too far apart now, or their head got too big. But most people, if you have a distinctive character with clear, identifiers, like a clear haircut or, wardrobe, they'll read them as the same character, and they won't be as nitpicky as you are yourself.
Yeah, I just want to add to the point. I can't believe how different Nat looks from the first book to the 5th book. But when you draw the character literally thousands of times, it evolves like over and over.
Yeah, like I feel like I only really figure out what a character actually looks like 3/4 of the way through the book, and it's like, oh no, like I messed up. but that's part of the fun of it too, is like, even if you look at, for example, something like Steven Universe, like Steven's design changes from the first episode to the last in a way that's really fun and appealing. Like, let yourself grow, like don't feel like you have to be bad to any one thing. But if you're looking for some kind of a consistency, like have one drawing on hand you can keep on looking back to. Like, draw them once from the front, draw them once from the side, and like if it changes a bit, that's fine, but you always have something to look back at.
Okay, real quick.
I agree.
I knew you were going to say that. What do we have to look forward to from each of you?
The next book in the Leon series will be out this time next year. The title is tentatively called Leon the Magnificent.
Awesome.
Pick it up, Scholastic Graphics.
All Is Not Lost, book 5 is coming out in February. It's a class trip to Philadelphia.
Yo!
Awesome.
Cardboard Kingdom 3, Snow and Sorcery will be out this November, set during winter break in the Cardboard Kingdom. And I have a new superhero series starting this September called The Stupendous Switcheroo, about a kid who wakes up every day with brand new powers.
Awesome.
Same. Original untitled middle grade graphic novel, hopefully coming out next year. But in the meantime, I have written a Sonic the Hedgehog one-shot that should be coming out this summer. Please look forward to it.
Yay!
Jamar, Maria, Chad, Gale, thank you so much. Big round of applause.